So we ready to dig into Samuel? Let's give it a go. Okay. So last week we stopped at verse chapter 20. We're in chapter 20, and the last verse we read was verse 17, where we saw once again that there's some kind of a covenant or treaty or something that is entered into between Jonathan and David. And again, we see that Jonathan has this, over in verse 17, that Jonathan has this overwhelming love, that these covenants seem to always be initiated by Jonathan. And we see, just to read verse 17 again, Jonathan, out of his love for David, adjured him again, for he loved him as himself. Boy, adjured. I don't know what adjured means, but it's to swear him. It's to swear him into this covenant is how I would translate that word. Okay, so now let's start with verse 18. And here, if you recall, we already had a situation where it seemed pretty clear to David that Saul really wants to kill him. Jonathan really doesn't believe it. And so the last time this happened, Jonathan confronted his father, and Saul said, no, I don't want, I promise you, I don't want to kill him, and so then Jonathan believes him, and David kind of goes along with it, and he goes back to court, and then of course happens again, and it's dangerous, and so here we are at a situation that David has already run away. And he doesn't know what to do. And Jonathan still doesn't believe that his father really and truly wants to kill him, even though he really tried. And and he said when David ran away to Nayot, to Ramah, and kind of sheltered with Samuel there for a while, Saul not only sends people to kill him, but he himself comes, and it's only through this intervention and this prophetic ecstasy that kind of, gets Saul off into some other, takes his attention off to somewhere else, that David is saved. So we have these situations that it seems so crystal clear that Saul really, it's not just a momentary losing his temper, but that he really does want to kill David, but Jonathan still doesn't believe it. So that's where we're basically up to. So let's see what happens next. Okay, verse 18. Jonathan said to him, tomorrow will be the new moon, and you will be missed when your seat remains vacant. Now, what's the new moon? This is in Judaism and our Jewish traditions, goes back to the biblical traditions as well. A month is a lunar month. And as you know, the month has a cycle. There's a teeny weeny sliver when it's the new month, and it gets fatter. It's a full moon in the middle of the month, and then it starts going shrink, and then you have a little sliver again. So the first day of the month is marked by this new little moon that comes out. And the truth of the matter is that a lunar month is only ever 29 or 30 days. So you can expect that it's going to be either this day or that day that there's going to be a new moon. But the month, today we have a calendar where it's kind of all been figured out in advance. But in those days, the month was declared when they actually saw the new moon. And so what we're going to see here is a new year, a new month, and that is, by the way, something we celebrate, the new month. It's kind of funny. Today, it's not a holiday, but we have special prayers. We say, we read the praises of the Hallel, which is a group of psalms, as special prayers. And you can see here from this story that indeed, going all the way back to the days of Saul, the first day of the month was some kind of a celebratory day. We also know that from the Bible that there were in the days of the temple. Now here, there is no temple. You'll recall at the time of Saul, the tabernacle in Shiloh has already been destroyed, and the temple in Jerusalem has not yet been built. So there is no temple, but there is the tradition that we already know from the days of the desert tabernacle of bringing special sacrifices on the new month. So all that coming together, we can see that the first day of the month is a certain celebration, okay, in the king's court, in Saul's court. So Jonathan is saying tomorrow is going to be the first of the month, and he's going to be expected at court because it's a special day, and he won't be there. So the day after tomorrow, go down all the way to the place where you hid the other time. Now he says here the day after tomorrow, the actual word in Hebrew in verse 19, vishilashta, is a very weird word. It's not very clear what it means, but it's the root of the word is the number 3. Okay, it says vishilashta, and 3 in Hebrew is shalosh. So it's something has to do with 3. So the way it has been translated here is tomorrow's the new moon, and then the day after tomorrow, which is essentially the third day. It's today, tomorrow, and the next day. So instead of saying the day after tomorrow, probably the more literal way to translate would be on the third day. Okay, you go all the way down to the place where you had the other time and stay close to the Ezel stone. Now, by the way, this translation that I'm using for is talking about on the third day. That are all other translations that are saying that what Jonathan was actually saying, you need to go and hide today for 3 days. Okay. And on the third day is when, Jonathan's going to come to him. So either translation works. And he's telling him to go to some place. We don't know where that place is, but whatever is the place he hid last time. And stay close to this particular stone, the Ezel stone, whatever that means. Now I will shoot. So now Jonathan says, you stay there and wait for me. You hide. Okay. So no one should cheat you. And now Jonathan has this plan. Now I will shoot 3 arrows to one side of it as though I were shooting at a mark, and I will order the boy to go and find the arrows. So he's going out from the palace, and he's going to go to this area near this rock where he knows David will be hiding, and he's going to stand not next to David, but somewhere not far, and he's going to pretend he's doing target practice with his servant boy, okay? And as would be normal, he would shoot the arrows, and the boy's job is to go and pick up the arrows and bring them back. And so now he works out these code words that David will then be able to hear him and know what the message is. He says, if I call to the boy, hey, the arrow's on this side of you, then, or in other words, it's not this, the arrows are between you and me, okay? And actually in the Hebrew, it says the arrows are between you and me, go get them, okay? In other words, go get and bring them to me, kind of thing. And he says, then if I say that kind of a language, then he says to David, be reassured and come, for you are safe and there is no danger as the Lord lives. But if instead I call to the lad, hey, the arrows are beyond you, okay, then leave, for the Lord has sent you away. As the promise we made to each other, may the Lord be witness between you and me forever. So that was the deal. David said, fine. And he goes and hides in the field. David hid in the field. The new moon came, and the king sat down to partake of the meal. When the king took his usual place on the seat by the wall, Jonathan rose, and Abner sat down at Saul's side. But David's place remained vacant. That day, however, Saul said nothing. It's accidental, he thought, or it's a coincidence, okay? He must be unclean and not yet cleansed. And here's another reference to things that we know already from the Bible, from the book of Leviticus, for example, that when you are, there's different rules of purity, and if a man calls to be a woman, but in this case, a man, if certain things have happened, he's had certain secretions or whatever, then he is considered impure. And so Saul is saying then he wouldn't be able to come with us, which indicates to me that it wasn't just a feast, but they might have had some kind of bringing of a sacrifice on an altar. And again, there's no temple at this time, so they could have had a local altar and brought up some of these sacrifices. So in which case, it's very possible that this idea of being pure is relevant. So he was willing to say, okay, one day maybe he's not pure, and so he's not coming. But on the day after the new moon, the second day, David's place was vacant again. So Saul said to his son, Jonathan, why didn't the son of Jesse come to the meal yesterday or today? Okay, so now Jonathan makes up a story. Jonathan answered Saul, David begged leave of me to go to Bethlehem. He said, please let me go, for we are going to have a family feast in our town, and my brother has summoned me to it. Do me a favor, let me slip away to see my kinsman, which is why he has not come to the king's table. So this is very interesting, because you will recall that when Samuel goes to crown David king, he uses the same excuse. Remember, Samuel is going to crown David. He doesn't want the king's men to know that he's about to crown somebody else king. And so the excuse is, oh, I'm going for a feast and for sacrifices or whatever to the same Bethlehem. So it's very possible that Jesse's family was known for their big feasts. Okay, which is why Samuel was able to use that excuse. It's why David could have used the excuse. But of course, here Saul does not buy this. Okay, Saul flew into a rage against Jonathan. You son of a perverse, rebellious woman, he shouted. Whoa, not enough that he insults his son, he insults his wife, his mother. We don't know who she is, but whatever. I know that you side with the son of Jesse to your shame and to the shame of your mother's nakedness. Wow, he is angry. He's cursing Jonathan. He's cursing the woman who gave birth to him for as long. But here is very, very critical, this verse. For as long as the son of Jesse lives on earth, neither you nor your kingship will be secure. Okay, so Saul already understands. Saul does not know that Samuel has has anointed David, but he already suspects, okay, he may even feel sure about it, that David is going to usurp the kingdom from Saul and his family. Okay, so he says that. He says, you're crazy. Jonathan, David is your threat. Okay, if David takes over the kingship after me, you're out. You're my firstborn son. You're the normal heir. You're the crown prince. Why are you siding with David? And then he goes further. Now then, have him brought to me, for he is marked for death. So Jonathan hears this very clearly. His father wants to kill him, but he doesn't. He's trying to sway him. He's trying to say, oh, you don't really mean that, Dad, do you? But Jonathan spoke up and said to his father, why should he be put to death? What has he done? At that, Saul threw his spear at him to strike him down. Okay, so it's not enough that we have seen very clearly that Saul wants to kill David. He's angry at Jonathan. He just now tried to kill his own son because he's defending David. And Jonathan realized that his father was determined to do away with David. Jonathan rose from the table in a rage. He ate no food on the second day of the new moon because he was grieved about David and because his father had humiliated him. And I think this says a great deal about Jonathan and his character. Very often when scripture tells us something, it gives us reasons or says anything, the order in which something is written is very often significant. And you can usually say that if there's two becauses, okay, the first because is the more important one or the more significant one. And if we take that here, we can say that Jonathan was more grieved about David than he was about his own humiliation. And I think that's special. That's really, really special. And it says something about his friendship and his love for David. In the morning, Jonathan went out into the open for the meeting with David. He went to the field, accompanied by a young boy. So now he's going to go through this whole thing to get the message to David. He said to the boy, run ahead and find the arrows that I shoot. And as the boy ran, he shot the arrows past him. When the boy came to the place where the arrows shot by Jonathan had fallen, Jonathan called out to the boy, hey, the arrows are beyond you. Okay, and that was the original code words to indicate to David that things were dangerous. And Jonathan called after the boy, quick, hurry up, don't stop. So Jonathan's boy gathered the arrows and came back to his master. The boy suspected nothing. Only Jonathan and David knew the arrangement. Jonathan handed the gear to his boy and told him, take these back to the town. So what he's doing is he now has given the message to David, and he's now sending the boy away. And we're going to see now he and David are going to meet. Okay, which is very, very interesting, because I would ask a question here. If he was willing to meet with him anyway, why go through this whole subterfuge with the arrows? We're gonna come back and answer that question. When the boy got there, David emerged. In other words, when he left, when the boy had left, okay, David emerged from his concealment to the south of the rock. Okay, it says the Negev. Negev is the south, and Etzel is that rock. Okay, he flung himself face down on the ground, David. Okay, and bowed low 3 times. They kissed each other and wept together. David wept the longer. Jonathan said to David, go in peace, for we two have sworn to each other in the name of the Lord. May the Lord be witness between you and me. and between your offspring and mine forever. It's a very, very poignant meeting between the two of them. And what we see here, and we started talking about this last week and the week before as well, as to the relationship between David and Jonathan. And what we have seen is that Scripture was fairly clear that it was Jonathan who took the initiative in this relationship at each time. And we didn't see as much coming from David. What we see here, though, is clearly a switch. David, first of all, he realizes he's so grateful. He realizes that Jonathan has just saved his life. Jonathan risked his life in order to go and get this information from Saul. And now he realizes that he's finished. Saul really does want to kill him, but that Jonathan took a very strong stand and sided with his friend over his own father. And so he is enormously grateful, and he bows three times as an expression of his deference, of his gratefulness. They kissed each other and wept together. So on the one hand, you see this, the two of them are pained because they know they now have to separate. Okay, they cannot be seen together. David is a marked man. Jonathan is the son of the king. And so they weep together, but then Scripture tells us what David wept the longer. Okay, so I found an article. Actually, there's this fellow, I had quoted him a number of weeks, actually probably a few months ago already, when we were discussing Saul in the beginning of his kingship, and there was a bit of confusion of what happened when, and when he was crowned, and when he was fighting the Ammonites, and when he was fighting the Philistines. And this fellow by the name of Yosef Goel Didi, he's written a number of articles, and he's written a book about about the book of Samuel, especially this issue here during Saul's reign. And he was the one who came up with this whole theory, which I embraced, about moving the order of the verses, and it kind of made more sense. So the same guy, I found a wonderful article, which I want to share with you what he's saying. And he starts by pointing, first of all, and the reason I was interested in this article, because I was very intrigued by the development of the relationship between David and Jonathan, where it's clear that Jonathan is the one who initiates the relationship, who clearly loves David more than David loves him initially, and then we have this sudden turn of events. So I saw that this article dealt with that, and I was very interested in that. But he starts out with the question, and he says, what is the whole nature, okay, of this whole idea that David presents to Jonathan about tomorrow's the new moon, and this is what we're going to do, and this is how you're going to know. And he's questioning the first time this happens, because this happens already back in verse 5, if I can find it. Yeah, this was the first time. Tomorrow's the new moon, to sit with the king in the meal. Said, let me go, I'll hide in the countryside until the third evening. So in other words, we did this already. All right. So he's asking, what's the nature of his? He's already knows, because this is already, he already knows that Saul wants to kill him. So why does he have to go further on? And then he asks a further question. He said, what is the nature of the covenant that we keep seeing referred to in the relationship between David and Jonathan? And just to review that, let's go and see where we first meet that. Okay. It goes back to chapter 18, after the war with Goliath. We have there in verse 1, we first learn about how Jonathan and David are connected. They're like soulmates, okay? But then it says, and Jonathan loved him as himself. So we see here for the first time, there is Jonathan is the one who has the greater love, or it's taking the initiative. And then when we see in verse 3, that Jonathan enters into this covenant with David as an expression of his love for him. And we see that it's Jonathan that initiates the covenant, and it's as a result of, or an expression of Jonathan's love for David. So this is the first time we see this idea of a covenant. And we see it mentioned again, this idea of the covenant is mentioned in our chapter 20, we have in verse 16 that Jonathan entered into this covenant with the house of David. Okay. And it says in verse 17, the verses we read today at the beginning of our class, that then Jonathan continued to, swear David on his love, etc. Again, we have this idea of a covenant between them. And then we have at the end of chapter 20, we see in verse 42, when Jonathan says to David, go in peace, for we have sworn, the two of us, okay? And referring there is this idea of swearing clearly refers back to this idea of a covenant. So what is the nature of this covenant? So what he says is that the initial covenant was a covenant of staying together. In other words, that Jonathan and David would continue not just to be friends, but one would not leave the other, okay? And it is this covenant that creates the problem for David. He cannot just leave, because that's also another question. If David is so sure that Saul is trying to kill him, why does he keep needing to have to convince Jonathan of this? If he is already sure, he's been seen evidence of it, time and time again, he should just say, okay, Jonathan, I'm out of here, goodbye. Okay. And so what this fellow, this Goel Didi is saying is that the nature of the covenant was that they would not leave one another. And therefore, what David is trying to accomplish is to get Jonathan to admit that indeed Saul is trying to kill him, and to release him from this covenant that they would stay together. Okay. So this is why he has to keep trying over and over to convince him, and why the covenant keeps being mentioned. Okay. So and then it goes through like that. Now in the last verse, in let's see, verses, we're back in chapter 20 now. Okay. So in verse, we start with verse 10. Okay. And this whole situation, in verse 16, when we have that covenant again, it is because it's as if to remind us that because of this covenant, we have to go through this whole thing again. Okay. So now, but this guy also explains it in a different way. He says that this is actually a new covenant. Okay. And this covenant is not only about we'll stay together, because already the question has been presented in a very real way. Is Saul trying to kill David? And if so, then it's clear that David and Jonathan can't stay together. So this covenant now is talking about the covenant says that Jonathan entered into covenant with the house of David. Okay, so here we've already moved covenants, and it is Jonathan swearing to protect the house of David, or the house of David would protect Jonathan. So it's not just, what happens if David is killed in this whole thing? What if Jonathan is killed in this whole thing? So this covenant takes it beyond that. It's not just the two of them staying together, but that has to be released at some point. But rather this idea of David and Jonathan pledging to be good to each other and to their descendants. Now, what he presents here, though, is talks all from David's perspective, that David is incapable of understanding the depth of love that Jonathan has for him. He knows he loves him. He doesn't really reciprocate it at that same level. And he has trouble understanding how Jonathan could love him so much. Why is this so important? Because, as we have seen, the situation of Saul wanting to kill David has placed Jonathan in really an untenable position, because he either has to betray his father, or he has to betray his friend. And if he betrays his father, who's the king, he's in far greater danger than if he were to betray David. And therefore, this Yosef Goel Didi is saying, therefore, David questions the extent to which Jonathan is really and truly protecting him. Because he says in his mind, it's in Jonathan's interest to turn him into his father. So he's also questioning himself, can I trust this Jonathan? Which becomes part of the plan. Why didn't he just say, well, Jonathan will come to me? He wants to be in a situation where he's hiding somewhere else. And then if Jonathan indeed comes back and throws the arrows with that message, he can run away in the event that Jonathan wants to actually do him harm or turn him into his father. He's not seeing, Jonathan hasn't seen him, okay? So that gives him that understanding. But then when Jonathan realizes that indeed his father, wants to kill David, and he comes back, and then Jonathan sends that boy away. And at that point, and he's looking for David, he expects David to come out to him. And it is that point, as a result of this whole interchange, that David, for the first time, realizes that Jonathan has actually chosen sides, and he's chosen David over his father. And it is that situation that enables David to come out of hiding, to meet with Jonathan. And then indeed, it's not just that he's grateful to him, but it's almost as if, now I see things differently. I realize, Jonathan, you have always been there for me. You have truly loved me. And so you have this enormous expression of appreciation where he falls to the ground, he bows to him 3 times, they hug and kiss each other. And there, on the one hand, you see they're finally coming together with this mutual love between the two of them. But then you have David even more so. Why is David even more so? Because at this point, he not only is relieved by realizing that Jonathan was totally loyal to him, but he's now feeling guilty. He's feeling guilty that he doubted that he could rely on Jonathan. And I just thought this was a very interesting interpretation of all of this. And then how that when at the end of the chapter, in chapter 40, in verse 42, when he again refers to how we have sworn together in the name of God that nothing should come between us, not you or me, or between our children. And what is that? I mean, at this point, Jonathan realizes that David is going to be the next king if he survives. And he has thrown in his lot with him, but he also realizes that probably his father will be killed at some point, and that he may also, I mean, he's in an impossible situation. And it's very possible that he sees that they will both, I mean, we know this is the last time they meet, okay? And we know the end of the story. So we know Jonathan is killed and Saul is killed and David becomes the king. But it's clear from this situation that they can't both survive. And so there become this covenant that has moved already from a covenant of the two of them sticking out with each other and continuing to be friends. The covenant becomes a covenant between the house of Saul, or the house of Jonathan, not the house of Saul, the house of Jonathan, and the house of David. Whoever survives and their descendants are bound to one another, loyal to one another, and pledge to be kind and caring for one another, which is what we are going to see later on. We're going to see that David will fulfill that commitment to Jonathan, even when he's put in difficult positions. I think this is a very, very tragic situation. And I think I mentioned this earlier, that Saul himself is a tragic figure. He brought this upon him, his ridiculous jealousy of David. There was no indication that, there was an indication that God had turned his favor away from Saul. And there was an indication that he wanted David to be the next king. But there's no indication that he's going to be killed early, or that David is supposed to kill him. And the anointing of David was kept secret. Saul could have lived out his life and died, and the next king would have been David. Saul gave his daughter, Michal, to David, which means that if all had gone normally, in any case, Saul's grandchildren would be king after David, because David's firstborn with his first wife, Michal, would have been some boy who would have been David's son and Saul's grandson. His daughter would have been a queen, his grandson would have been a king, and Jonathan, who was David's best friend, would have been his, master at arms or whatever. He would have been a prince. He would have been, it didn't have to be like this. And it just, you see the hatred, the jealousy, the craziness. And I think in many ways, when scripture tells us this evil spirit came upon Saul, it was a spirit that did not have to be. Okay. If Saul had been just, I don't know, if he had immersed himself in a positive spirit instead of a negative spirit, he would have been able to accept all of these things and seen the positive in it. But instead, he wrapped himself in a spirit, not just of evil, but of paranoia, of jealousy, and that brought us to where we are. And we're going to continue next week with chapter 21, which begins, of course, the saga of David fleeing from Saul. Any questions or comments?
This is Maria speaking.
Hi, Maria.
Hi. Just curious to learn why this very strong love between Jonathan and David. Where is that coming from? You know, because it's unique. It is a unique love between them. So I don't know if it's I've been thinking about, I know that David had a very difficult childhood, right? Maybe he didn't have the brotherhood love or something
I think
like that.
All along, the love is from Jonathan to David. Even at the end, okay? David reciprocates the love out of a sense of gratitude, out of a sense of total understanding for the first time how deeply committed Jonathan is to him. So I think the initial question is, why is Jonathan so enamored with David? And I think, though, if you go, but you have to see it in context. I think that David was special. Because Michal, if you recall, when David first shows up on the scene and he defeats Goliath and the Philistines and all this, and he's this hero, and Saul has promised his daughter to David, but he initially was thinking in terms of Meirav, and turns out Meirav in the meantime is betrothed to somebody else. And we learned then that Michal is in love with David. Now they barely knew each other. She saw him. There was something about him that struck her, and she was in love with him. So Saul said, "Oh, okay, that's a good plan. We'll give Michal to David." And so when you see Jonathan also enamored, I think it begins with this enamored. He's enamored with David. He sees David's character. He sees his successes militarily. He sees also a degree of modesty. I mean, I picture David, what to me says so much. Saul is putting his big armor on David, right? And what does this armor reflect? It's like an external manifestation of power, of, close to the king. It's the king's armor he's wearing, and it's all these external things that are supposed to boost him in the eyes of the nation, and he can't even walk in it, and goes, oh, forget it. He gets rid of all of it, and he stands before Goliath as himself, and of course he stands in his faith opposite Goliath. But what are you seeing? You're seeing a man who is honest with himself, who is, he puts out who he is in front of you, and that's very attractive. And it's very, it just, I can see why both Michal and Jonathan were just wow, and very different from Saul. Very different from Saul. And one of the things we're going to see later on, quite a while from here, okay? But just to reference it now, when David brings the ark from where it's been sitting actually since the middle of the book of, to the beginning of the book of Samuel, okay, when the ark was taken by the Philistines, and then they bring it back and it's sitting in Kiryat Yearim, and it sits there for 20 years, okay? So then David said, he has defeated the Jebusites in Jerusalem, and he bought the threshing floor, and he says, okay, let's bring the ark up to Jerusalem. And the first time it's a catastrophe. The second time he realizes part of what he needs to do, and we'll hopefully we get there. We'll study this in depth. But what happens is he's bringing the ark up, and he's dressing in ordinary clothes. He is not wearing his kingly garments. He's dressing in ordinary clothes, and he's dancing before the ark as an ordinary person. And Michal is up in the palace looking down from the window, and she looks at David, and she's disgusted, totally disgusted. And if you think about it, she is the daughter of Saul. Saul is the king. He's got the fancy armor. He's got the court. Everything is about the trappings of kingdom with Saul. And Saul is very tall. And David is little and runty and a redhead. And, he's the little one that nobody thinks when Samuel's looking among the sons of Jesse. He's just this little guy. And you can see that contrast. Michal represents the house of Saul. David represents something completely different, so much more authentic. Now, originally, Michal was attracted to David. She's another tragic figure. What happens to her and how she, well, we'll get to that. But, but that just tells us something about David. He represents something so different from Saul, in many ways so refreshing. And that's just how I explain this whole thing. Any other comments or questions? Yes, Carol.
Yeah, the covenant. I always see a covenant as between two people, but here it's very obvious it's between three people.
Who's the third?
God.
No, it's not between three people. What it is that the covenant is a swearing ceremony. You swear fidelity, you swear loyalty, and what they're doing is they're swearing before God. So it creates that much more power and legality, shall we say, to this covenant, because it's not just, we'll be together. But if you swear before God, or it's kind of as we say to this, God is my witness, okay? That's the same idea. When you're calling God into this as a witness or swearing before God, then you're saying God knows and God will know if I breach my covenant. It just gives it that much more power.
So when it says in verse 23, the Lord be between thee and me,
yes.
How would you paraphrase that then, Sondra? Is it be with?
It's the Lord be witness between you and me forever. It's exactly what I'm talking about, okay? It is the Lord who is there. We can't deny our covenant together because the Lord is there standing on this. And the Lord is there as a witness. Yeah, as a witness between. And in fact, my translation adds that word witness. It's really in parentheses and brackets. So it's clearly not part of the literal translation, but I think it is it's being referred to here.
Right, thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, well, this was great. Thank you so much. And we will meet again next week, and we will take up with chapter 21. Have a great rest of the week and a good weekend. See you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.